for anybody who's late, this webinar will be recorded. Welcome all. This is the ARMC Perspective, a series of webinars that we've been doing. This is our third one, about cybersecurity focused on the African continent. Our partner GCA and Andy Bates will be part of the presentation. He will give us a little bit about what it is that GCA does in terms of like supporting us and delivering. ARMC is in a number of countries. We have partners in Kenya, Uganda, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, and working towards a few others. The purpose of the ARMC perspective is to kind of deliver a view and perspective on how we can meet today's cybersecurity risks and needs as we go forward, especially in post-COVID, where people have had so much time and effort over the period to kind of, find methods to, excuse me 1 minute. We have had, I wanted to kind of give a special welcome to our speakers. We have Andy, like I said, and we also have Brian Dilly from Lloyds Bank, who will be giving us his perspective on how they've managed the cybersecurity risk in a bank in the UK. And we also have Dr. Odundu, who will give us a perspective on how cybersecurity is affecting the Kenyan financial market these days. Housekeeping, all mics should be on mute during the call. There is a question and answer session at the end. We also have a poll. It would be very useful for people to kind of like just answer that. So that will give us a very good perspective in terms of what it is that you are looking for our cybersecurity program that we have. We now have a 2-minute video, which will start now. Saldis, if you can, and then we will start our full program. This just to give us a little bit of background on ARMC. Saldis?
ARMC is an outstanding British cybersecurity and risk management consultancy based in the heart of the City of London, the world's financial capital. We have strong ties and deep practical experience of working in Africa, dedicated to serving the needs of Africa's financial services sector, covering all aspects of cybersecurity and risk management. Cybercrime is one of the fastest growing and most critical threats facing the global financial services sector today. Recent cyber industry statistics support this view. Data breaches exposed 36 billion records in the first half of last year. 68% of business leaders feel their cybersecurity risks are increasing. The average cost of a financial services data breach is approximately $6 million. Financial services firms across Africa are not immune from this threat. The numbers of known cyber attacks impacting Africa's businesses is ever increasing, with millions being lost to fraud and ransom payments annually. Businesses of all sizes and across all sectors are also being attacked. Your customers and suppliers are also at risk. Protecting your business-critical data from cybercriminals has never been more crucial. Our highly experienced British-trained cybersecurity experts are well equipped to support your business. We offer cybersecurity advice, training and technology solutions that protect, detect, respond to cyber attacks. Our solutions include penetration testing, cybersecurity risk assessments, cyber awareness training, cyber incident response planning, and 24/7 incident recovery support. What we truly value at ARMC are trust, integrity, excellence, and respect for our customers and their culture. So, why not visit our website or our LinkedIn page to find out more?
Thank you. I encourage you to visit our website, africariskmanagers.com. We have, like I said, we have a fantastic panel of speakers lined up today, and we're going to start with Dr. Odundu, who will give us a view of what it's like in the financial markets in the Kenyan location. So, Dr. Odundu, it would be I'm really pleased to welcome you to chat with us and tell us a little bit about Kenya.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you very much, Ruth, and participants, as well as the panelists. I'm going to talk about the Kenyan and the regional perspective and looking at our context as far as these cybersecurity concerns, as well as the effects of the COVID-19 in this region, covering Kenya among other countries within the region. In this COVID-19 era, there is a risk of high cybersecurity, especially in Kenya and within the region. A heightened reliance on digital infrastructure raises the cost of failure in this pandemic scale. And dependency on digital infrastructure multiplies. The internet has become the channel of effective human interaction and the primary way we work, contact, and support one another. Both the private and public sector, as I told, the banking sector, are enforcing work from home policies and social interactions, rapidly becoming the confines of video calls, like now we are on a video call, quite a bit on social media and the chat programs. I'm a board member, and right now, all our board meetings, we are holding them virtually. And I don't see us going backward. It could seem to work very well because we have directors who are not within Kenya. And since we started this, I don't think there's any need for them to come for the board meetings in Kenya. We can do it virtually. So in today's unprecedented context, cyber attacks that deprives organizations of access to their devices, data, or internet could be devastating. It's really very, very, very devastating. Cyber crimes exploit fears and uncertainty. Cyber criminals are exploiting the human weakness to penetrate system defenses. In a crisis situation, people tend to make mistakes that they would otherwise not have made. Online, making a mistake in terms of which link you click or who you trust with your data can cost you dearly, and that is costing the institutions dearly. The vast majority of cyber attacks deploy social engineering methods, and so cyber criminals are extremely creative in devising ways to exploit the users and technology to access passwords, networks, data, and often capitalizing on popular topics and trends to tempt users in unsafe online behavior. So the Kenyan experience with cybersecurity, even before the COVID situation, Kenya was subject to cyber risk owing to its high internet penetration, the highest in Africa. Figures from the communication authorities in Kenya show a steady quarterly rise in cybersecurity threats. For example, Kenya firms were hit with 37.1 million attacks between October and December 2019, 47.3 attacks which raised in the period towards the previous last quarter of 2019. And this costed the country close to 30 billion Kenya shillings. So Kenya is ranked among the top 10 countries in Africa with the highest number of people exposed to cybercrime. So in the COVID era, the Kenya computer incidents, for example, actually detected about 32.5% cyber threat attacks between that period, July to September 2020. And our Communication Authority has gave us a figure of about 152% rise, an increase of about 13%, 13.9 million threats, which are attacks which has actually happened within that period. So out of 32.9 million cyber threats, we have about 12 million, which is recorded between April and now. So this represents about 154% increase. So you can see that the increase is compounded, and this situation is actually being made worse, given that the COVID wave has actually increased from the first, the second. Now we are having the third wave. We're having a lockdown in the major cities, Nairobi included, and that has made things worse because now it means that the use of data, relying on internet and data cybersecurity crimes are increasing, and that is the area that they're really exposed. And we have also seen web application attacks increasing by about 86% during this period. And this has also been increased when we have even child online abuses going on. And according to the Global Security Firm, we see Kenya is among the African countries facing possible increase in cybercrime in 2021 amid an economic uncertainty. So I'm looking forward for discussion on this particular area, and I'm happy we have Brian and Andy, who is going to give us different perspectives and their experiences. Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, Salis.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dundu. That was a really good introduction and a real kind of gives you a feel of what it is that we are trying to address. Brian, thank you so much for joining us. I think it's a really good idea that we are actually starting to kind of like see what you do, how you developed it, and hopefully learn from it for when we go forward and try and develop these things on the continent. And Kenya is a good place to start after what Dr. Dundu has said. So thank you very much and welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen. Thank you very much for inviting me. So my name is Brian Dilley. I'm the Group Director of Fraud and Financial Crime Prevention at Lloyds Banking Group in the UK. And I'm going to talk about the impact of cybercrime on our customers. As Dr. Dundu has just said, you know, the world has changed very much in terms of our working patterns over the last year or so. And that's had an impact on customers, on the way they operate, the way they interact with us, and also the way they respond to criminals who are trying to either defraud them or get their data to defraud them or others. So just a bit of background to start with. If I can make the slide move on. There we go. So obviously, with everybody being into various lockdowns in various parts of the world, there was a massive transfer of activity to digital, and I think, you know, I was talking to somebody the other day, not unlike myself, who had the same £20 note in their wallet from March of last year and hadn't spent any cash at all in a year. Which, if you'd ever think you would say, I didn't spend cash at all for a year, then you would have thought that was just inconceivable. But there are quite a lot of people who have not spent any cash at all. Contactless payments have taken over. A lot of people who have never been on online banking or banking on their app have done so. We've done a lot of work to try and help them to understand that and to stay safe. But obviously that brings additional risks and additional opportunities for criminals, and particularly with the vulnerable, the elderly as part of that vulnerable group. They are using some of these tools for the first time. And then I think it's fair to say that during lockdown, they've been bombarded by messages from people pretending to be their bank, pretending to be the police. I'll talk a little bit about some of the key examples, but you know, the main ones really are around people getting phone calls to say, this is your bank's fraud department, your account is compromised, I need to move all of your money to a safe account. Sometimes the phone call purports to be from the police to say that actually your bank account is at risk and we need to move it to to another bank, but also tells the victim that the bank is in on it. So whatever you do, don't tell the bank anything, and they might call you to check if you try to move the money, but this is the story to tell them to make sure that you don't trip their systems, because they're all in on it and they're going to steal your money if you don't move it quickly. So there's been an avalanche of those sorts of calls and messages. I think the biggest change during lockdown for me was the initial months of the lockdown in the UK, we actually saw cyber fraud drop. And I think there's a combination of things. One was lots of people were getting to grips with working remotely. Ironically, some of those were much more cautious about what they did with their data and much more cautious about things coming in. So it created an additional risk and additional vulnerability, but it also heightened some people's awareness. I think the disruption that we all saw to our working patterns was evident with the criminal gangs as well. So a number of the call centres that would be making the outbound calls to people to try and con them, they were disrupted as well and didn't have the capability to work from home. Because I think the thing that is very clear, I think, over the last probably decade or more, is that fraud and cybercrime is a business. And what you see is now we talk about crime as a service. So there are people now in the criminal world who specialize in certain aspects of the attempt to defraud, to access systems, etc. So you no longer necessarily have somebody who tries to access a system or defraud an individual and will receive the money and will launder the money as well. You get somebody who specializes in a particular area. And an area that we've had a lot over the last few months in the UK is smishing, which is the text version of phishing. So where you get a text message trying to get you to get in touch with someone, or with a link in it where you put your personal details, and it's purporting to be from the bank, and it takes you to a website that obviously isn't the bank's, which you then put all your details in, and that is then used at a later date to social engineer you. So usually those that data that you've put in is not compromising your system. It's not putting malware on your computer. It's simply taking information from you that when somebody phones you back, they can then use that information to convince you that they're genuine. So they're essentially giving you information that you think, well, only my bank could know that because I've put that into the bank's system, or it's come from my bank account. And the fraudster is convincing you that they are somebody else by using that data that they put in. And when I talk about crime as a service, on the dark web, you can go in, and I looked at a website the other day where you can go in and you can buy a ready-made pack which will give you your kit to send out the text messages to people, the link to the website, and a website that is already mocked up for the bank of your choosing. So you can select your bank and decide which one you want to look like, and you can buy the pack and you can then use it. We're spending a lot of our time and using some of the tools that the Global Cyber Alliance produces and others as well, to try and identify those websites and shut them down as quickly as we can. But obviously, as quick as we shut them down, they pop up again. So crime as a service is a big part where people are specializing in certain parts of the journey. The vulnerability has increased because of lockdown, with people using much more online. But I do also think that the flood of phishing emails and smishing texts, now everybody is receiving probably several a day, and there is a greater awareness amongst a greater proportion of the population about the risks, and therefore people are not responding to them. But the flip side of that for us as a bank is actually when we do want to get in touch with the customer, it's quite difficult for us to do so because the customer assumes we're the fraudster, and therefore that's quite a difficult channel as well. So the whole thing it becomes quite difficult. So we're working on some solutions around how do you have a a trusted way of getting in touch with your bank where you absolutely know it's the bank, and for the banks to then to be saying, you know, if we call you, we will tell you to phone this number. We will not tell you to, we will not ask you for your credentials on the phone to try and head that off. So that's the environment. As I said here in the bottom left, fraud has been the most prevalent crime in the UK since 2014. So you're much more likely to be the victim of fraud in the UK than any other crime. But the interesting thing, and if you talk to the police about the response to it, they often say, well, if it doesn't bang or bleed, it's not prioritized. So it's the most prevalent crime, but there will always be more focus on police stopping people from being assaulted, shot, and you know, that sort of physical crime than fraud. And obviously the other part of fraud is it tends to be more difficult to find the perpetrator. The perpetrator might be overseas and outside the jurisdiction of the police, and additional skills are needed, which are in short supply in order to be able to prosecute. So prosecution is low, risk is low. You can probably do it. You can do it from your bedroom rather than having to, you know, do something where you might get caught physically. If you're going to go and rob a bank, you're probably going to get a long sentence. You risk being shot yourself. You've got a high chance of being caught because of CCTV, etc. And none of those apply to cyber fraud. So it's a low risk, high reward business, and it is a business, as I said before. So let's take a look at a couple of the things, a couple of the examples of what we've seen, and some of the things that we've been doing to try and stop some of this. So one of the big things we did in the UK is in March of last year, the major banks launched something called confirmation of payee, and a number of the other banks are gradually coming on board as well. Confirmation of payee it was actually, the idea of it was originally to stop bank errors rather than bank fraud, but it became a very useful tool for some of the, particularly things like the safe account scams that I talked about earlier, where somebody is telling you that they're transferring the money into account in your own name. So confirmation of payee, what it does is when you put your details in to make a payment, it sends a message out to the receiving bank, and when you've put your sort code and account number in and you put the name of the account, it checks the name of the account matches the name at the recipient bank. So before this, whilst people were putting in the name of the beneficiary that they were trying to pay to, there was nothing being done by the banks to check that that name was genuine. The banks checked the account number and the sort code, and therefore if you said that the account was in, you know, in a safe account scam, if they said this is going into account in your name, you could put into your online banking your own name, and it would go through to that bank account, even though that bank account was in someone else's name. Now what happens is that gets checked with the recipient bank. So if you were to put your own name in as the recipient, it would come back and say that's not the name on the account. And there is a process in place where it tells you if you're close and it's a similar name, and asks you if you recognize the name, if you want to proceed with it. It won't tell you, because of data protection requirements, it won't tell you if you got it completely wrong. It will just say that does not match, and you would have to go back to the person who's asking you to pay to query that if it's a genuine payment. But this had initially for about a month, it had about a 30% impact on some of the main scam types that we were dealing with. But as you see there, it settled down to about a 5% difference. And actually that difference there, I think, is quite interesting, because when you see that actually it's disruptive of the fraudsters for a month, and then they change how they operate because they've seen that that's stopping them, and then it goes down to 5%. How's it gone down to 5%? I think in two ways. One is they've directed more of their activity to banks that don't have confirmation of payee. So the action there to try and resolve that is to get all of the banks on confirmation of payee, which closes that down. And they've also moved into other types of fraud and other stories that would establish a belief in the customer, or in the victim, I should say, that there's a good reason why there is a difference on the account number. So they're very, very adaptable, and it literally happens in a few weeks, if not a few days, and sometimes a few hours with some of these things where they've adapted their techniques. So that's a very important initiative that we've done in the UK. And as I say, that there was a directive from one of the regulators here that the major banks had to do it by March 2020. We're hoping that either by volunteering or by coercion, that basically everyone will have confirmation of payee, and that will, I think, make a difference. But as I said before, the criminals will still adapt their methodologies to get round it and to move into other areas. But we always describe it as like whack-a-mole. You whack it in one area and it pops up in another, but you have to keep whacking, because otherwise it's going to pop up in all those areas. So that's confirmation of payee. I wanted to look at two particular areas that have been quite prevalent during lockdown, and the first of those is romance scams. So obviously, when everybody has been sitting at home and with not very much to do, a lot of people not being able to see friends and family, and a lot of people have been very lonely in that scenario. And of course, the criminals know that and prey on that. So the romance scams have increased significantly in the last year. There's some statistics there about the typical types of people that are scammed. But just to give you an idea of the sorts of things here, this is when there's various routes through this. Some is on the dating apps and the dating websites. Others are from direct approaches through emails or whatever. But this is basically where somebody certainly grooms you for a period of time into convincing you that they're going to marry you, going to move across to, often they're overseas, and they're going to move to live with you, and you're going to be happy together forever after. Whereas actually they're a con man who's trying to get money out of you. And the typical ways that they do get the money out of you is they, at some point, quite often they'll say they have some form of inheritance or business in their country, which is going to fund your life with them when you get together. Often that runs into trouble. That's the story. It runs into trouble, and they just need a small amount of money to pay for the lawyers to unlock the larger amount of money. And once you've paid the smaller amount, then it gets a bit more complicated. You need to pay a bit more. So that's one method. Another is that they're at the airport about to come over, and they've just been held by customs, and they need to pay somebody off in order to come and see you. So you need the money urgently. But just in terms of these, some of these are really, really long-term scams, because there's a lot of money that can be obtained in this. So this is not the high volume, low value frauds and scams. This is, if you succeed in one of these, you can take somebody's life savings. So we've had examples of where somebody has been, somebody thinks they've been in a relationship, a long distance relationship with somebody for perhaps 6, 7, 8 years before they get scammed, and they've never met the person in the 6, 7, 8 years, or sometimes they have met them briefly. But they are absolutely convinced that they are going to live with this person and marry this person. And we had a psychologist come and help us with some of our fraud defences last year, and some of the stories there. So the stories then we were looking at one of the particular scams. And even though the person had said to this person, I think you're scamming me here. I'm not sure you are who you say you are, and you're scamming me. The person still managed to convince them after that to pay away their life savings, because they basically said, look, nobody understands us. We've got a unique relationship. You know, I know you don't trust me, but look, we've been talking for years. Would I be doing this if it wasn't for that? So it's, you know, the emotional blackmail and the emotional strings that they're pulling in that. And, you know, even where somebody says, I think this is a scam, and had told their family, and their family had all said, this is a scam, that individual still was convinced by the romance scammer to pay away their life savings. So it's a very, very difficult one to stop. In terms of one of the big ones in business at the moment, business email compromise is the big one, and there's various versions of this. So business email compromise is basically where the criminals manage to send an email from either something that looks like a business account or something that is actually a business account. So there's two versions. One is where they've managed to get into your email by socially engineering you or malware or whatever, and they've managed to get your password, you know, and they've managed to get into the email, and they're then sending email from your account. Those ones are really, really dangerous, because if they have got into your email, what they will normally do is they will just sit and read your emails for months and months and months. And therefore, when they send the email that says, usually says, we've changed our banking details for the big payment that you're about to make, can you pay it to this account instead? It will sound convincing because they've read your emails and they know what's going on. So again, we've got examples of these where the email comes in and actually it continues the chain that you've had with somebody else, where it's talking about, you know, your kids going back to school after lockdown, and so it's got a nice, you know, oh, I hope the kids get on when they go back to school tomorrow. By the way, we've changed our banking details. Can you make the payment to this account instead? So those are the really, really, really difficult ones and really convincing ones. The others are where somebody sets up an email account and an email domain that looks very, very similar to the genuine one. So it will usually have perhaps, you know, 2 letters the other way round, for example. So it might say, you know, it might say Lloyd's Banking with 1 L, or it might say Lloyd's with LLYO instead of LLOY. And those ones are, yeah, they usually have less information, but obviously they've got some information from somewhere about the payment you're about to make, possibly from the recipient email account or something like that. But they've got less information, but they're still, you know, quite convincing. We also have examples of where, so we always tell people, if you get something that says there's a change of bank details, then make sure you call the person back. We've had examples of where people look at the email for the phone number and call that number and phone back, and of course that is the criminal's phone number. So now we have to say to people, make sure you call them back, but make sure you call them back on a number that you get from something other than the email and the invoice that you've just received on there. So again, each time you say, make sure you call people back, make sure you do that. So the only bit of advice I think on change the bank details is you should always speak to somebody that you've already spoken to, somebody that you know, to check. And I drive people mad. I'm the treasurer of my local running club. I drive people mad when they've emailed me something saying, you know, can you pay this amount? And I phone them back and say, was that you? And they go, well, yeah, of course it was me. And I say, sorry, I'm going to phone you back every time, I'm afraid. So, you know, that's the main piece of advice in relation to business email compromise. So I will leave you with three pieces of advice, really. Firstly, prevention is better than detection. So there's a lot of things that we have in place that are trying to detect when people have been the victims of fraud. But obviously, with fraud in particular and cyber fraud in particular, once the money has gone, it's gone. So we're always looking to try and prevent. We're looking to try and disrupt. But obviously, the impact on customers for that is that means we will disrupt genuine transactions as well. And what we try to do is try and keep the balance and make sure that it's obvious why we're asking when we do disrupt a payment, because most customers don't mind if they can understand it. They get frustrated if it's, I'm paying my credit card bill, which I've paid every day, every month for the last 2 years, and suddenly you've stopped it because you think it's a fraud. They get frustrated with those. They get frustrated if we freeze a payment and then ask them to call us and they can't get through. So those are the things. But other than that, I think if they understand it and they can deal with it quickly, they don't mind. So we're trying to prevent rather than cure. The second point on education, I've heard some people say education's a waste of time because you need to have the preventative controls in place, but education's a waste of time. I think that's because it's difficult to measure the impact of education because you don't get statistics on when it's been successful. My personal view is training and education is the @1 thing that is the most important, because the best scenario in preventing a fraud is somebody hangs up on the fraudster at the outset. Not that you catch it when they try and make a payment, not that you can recover the money from the recipient account after the payment's gone through, but that someone just hangs up, that people know enough to be able to hang up. And then lastly, information sharing and collaboration. So if we do all of this just as Lloyds, we will fail, because as I've already mentioned earlier, the criminals are collaborating, they're selling their services to each other. We have to work with the other banks, with law enforcement, with other bodies, and we're doing a lot of work with the GCA, for example, in trying to collaborate on a number of those sorts of initiatives. We have to do that. We have to share the information. Confirmation of payee is a good example of an in-flight payment where the two banks are talking to each other through a mechanism, and we need to be doing more of that in order to stop the fraudsters. So I will stop there. I will be around for questions afterwards if anyone wants to ask me anything during that.
Thank you, Brian. That was actually really quite amazing. I mean, the romance scam is kind of one of those things that you kind of are aware of, but it's not something that is kind of like fully understood. You kind of know this going on because you read about, really outrageous stories, but you kind of never have put it into a frame. So that was really brilliant of you to kind of like put it into context for what it's like and how we can kind of get to know things ahead of time rather than trying to solve something after the horse has flown or run away or whatever. That was brilliant. Thank you very much. Andy, you now have the pleasure of seeing how we can kind of resolve some of these issues, because Brian has very cleverly kind of identified what it is that we have as a problem, and you helping us kind of like finding how we can put together some solutions.
Exactly. Thanks for that, Ruth. And yes, I think it's good to end with solutions. But just a couple of personal stories. A friend of mine on the other side of the world lost $250,000 through romance scams. Quite an intelligent woman. So to echo Brian's point, this is big business. And another friend of mine lost 26,000 in business, exactly to what Brian said, that somebody changed the banking details on an email. I'm going to explain in a second why that's possible, and actually be even more scary than the conversation Brian's just had, and do something that hopefully will help all of you on this call to be slightly more secure. I guess from our first slide, you can see my slide, can't you, Ruth, just to check everything's working?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Brilliant. Just to introduce the GCA, and one of the reasons why we work closely with Lloyds Bank and other banks and businesses and industry around the world. We were actually founded in 2015, exactly due to Brian's point that in 2014 in the UK and the USA, cyber fraud became the biggest crime compared to all other crimes added together. So we were founded back to Brian and Dr. Adundo's point that prevention is better than cure. So we were founded by the New York District Attorney, the City of London Police, and the Centre for Internet Security. Our principles are that everything we do for the end user is free. So I'll say that again, that if you want your customers to be safer in terms of defense against cyber fraud, we have free solutions which we would love you to give to your customers. So we actually probably help your customers more than the banks on this call directly, which is partly why Brian's here, because Brian's mission is to protect Lloyds Banking Group customers as opposed to the core bank itself. Our solutions are easy to use, which is my mother uses one of our solutions. Importantly, they're also private, so we don't monetize anybody's data. We don't sell browsing data in the way that other free solutions do. The question always is, with something that's free, where is the catch? Classically, we have to make everything secure, and of course, we're global. So yesterday I was speaking to Vietnam Telecom, and the day before India and Brazil, and here we are with Kenya and Africa with ARMC. So in other words, we don't build solutions which only work in the UK and in London, but I think both myself and Brian, working together personally as well as corporately, have road tested a lot of the things which GCA do in the UK before we make them ready for service to deploy within Africa. So to move on, the reason why I have a picture of a tap here is a small metaphor to get you into the mindset of why things are so bad. Imagine the water industry was like the internet. We would pump dirty water to your house. We would sell you a complicated piece of equipment, a water purification plant. We'd call it something silly, like a firewall. You still get a virus, and we all blame the Russians. Or sometimes we blame the users. So that is the state of affairs of the internet. And some of the things we do in GCA is try and fix that to make it more industrial class. So first of all, and this is probably the shocking point building on what Brian said, the internet has many design flaws. It was designed for academics to communicate between universities. So I can send an email impersonating the majority of you on this call using your corporate email address without hacking into your system. So if Brian hadn't had this set up within the bank, I could email as brian.dilly@lloydsbankinggroup.co.uk, let's say, and pretend to be Brian or pretend to be any of you. Imagine how powerful that is. And any of you can learn how to do this. There's a video on YouTube that shows you how to do this. And the reason why, if you think about that, is that when you post a letter, nothing in the postal system confirms that you are the sender. So when they designed email, they said, well, post has worked really well for 200 years. Let's just make email do the same. Because in 1971, when the first email was transmitted, and ironically, the computer that transmitted it crashed straight away, nobody ever thought cybercrime would be there, and computers were big mainframes that lived in big buildings. People didn't imagine we'd all own a computer. So if you think this doesn't apply to you, I met with the CEOs of 22 global banks just in December last year. 7 of them were safe. The remainder, I could impersonate them. If you wish to check this out yourself, either during this call or later, simply email eauth@globalcyberalliance.org. We have a machine that tests your email status. It sends the email back to you. You know your position. As Brian discussed and Dr. Adundo and Ruth touched on, the important thing here is that if people can impersonate you, the criminals can see this. If I can test to see whether I can impersonate you, criminals can do that as well. So Brian's point about when the payment system changed, criminals moved to a different attack vector. If you turn this feature on, which is called DMARC, by the way, criminals know that you are now less vulnerable, and they move and attack other people. So it's like the old story that I don't need to run faster than a lion, I just need to run faster than the guy next to me. This is making your security posture on the internet look more mature. So please send that email. I think you may be shocked. So to Brian's point of somebody could change the O or the Y in Lloyd's. If you don't have this feature turned on, I can use your actual email. And again, the story of my friend who lost 26,000, the bank had actually emailed back to the guy, and the hacker then emailed back authorizing the payment. In that case, the bank was so close to have been liable for the $26,000 in this case that it was on a knife edge as to whether my friend lost the money or the bank lost the money. So although this is important for you to make your customers safe, this also affects your bottom line. So I think the message we're trying to convey here is by giving free solutions to your customers will like you more as banks. Hopefully they trade more with you. There's more money in the system. That's good for your top line. But actually, cyber fraud and business email compromise can cause a liability against you, the bank, and therefore you lose money at the bottom line, which is why people like Brian are vested and in working on this solution with people like ourselves. So just to reinforce that, Gartner's top 10 security tips for 2020 and 2021 is to turn this feature on called DMARC. It's a free service. Of course, it takes time to implement. Typically in a small organization, it would take an hour. In a big bank, it may take a week. Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs actually took a year to do this. That was just because they take time, but they were the fourth most spoofed email domain on the planet. And this is a graphical view of the situation, that although you know how many emails you're sending, you don't know how many people are pretending to be you. In the case of Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, 500 million spoof emails a year went out on behalf of them. There are only 50 million taxpayers in the UK, so that ratio of just spoof emails is crazy. Which this slide sort of talks about briefly, that for every 100 emails you send, you don't know how many other emails are out there. It could be 1,000. So by turning on this feature called DMARC helps you to know that position, and you can see what the criminals can see about you as a bank. Just to give you some big certificates of the people who are behind this concept to make the internet cleaner, the UK led the world with this. The National Cybersecurity Centre put an edict out. The Department of Homeland Security in America followed next, followed by the Australian government. I personally flew to New Zealand to meet the New Zealand cabinet, and they've now endorsed this as a principle, followed by Denmark and the Canadians. The Indian banking regulator also makes this a mandatory stipulation of the Indian banking community that all banks have to have DMARC turned on. The basic reason being is that if the CEOs of the banks can be spoofed, or people like Brian can be spoofed, the consequences are massive. But also those hundreds and thousands of £26,000 or dollars losses, of which happened to a friend of mine, those add up, and that's why the total cost of cybercrime and fraud on the planet today is $2 trillion. So we've talked about business email compromise. Brian's touched on that very well. Few people implement DMARC, and fewer still move all the way to properly configuring the solution. Working with GCA and ARMC hand in hand, we can help all of you to go through that journey. The other important point, though, is by turning DMARC on, you see who is pretending to be you, therefore you know who the criminals are. So we've built a platform now where we're gathering that data. It's something we're working with Lloyds Banking Group and various other people on. We now have a list of 5 million IP addresses of knowledge of those criminals. We work with people like Europol, Interpol, the FBI, City of London Police. To be able to use that data to help to get some of these people ultimately arrested is actually feasible. It has happened, and we're moving this forward at scale. So the conversation I'd like you all to have with your customers is that it'd be great if your customers reported cybercrime and fraud, but they'd spend all day on the phone. They spend all day emailing the police, because a lot of this happens. By turning this feature on, you can automatically report that people are pretending to be you to the GCA, and we can send that to the authorities. So I guess my closing point around this solution, or my nearly closing point, is to say, imagine if somebody had created an automatic cybercrime reporting platform. Wouldn't that be great? We all talked at the start of this conversation that prevention is much better than cure, and it absolutely is. But ultimately, to Brian's point about whack-a-mole, we've really just speeded up the whack-a-mole machine. If we can use evidence to eventually take down some of these criminals, that would be brilliant. In the HMRC example, there were still 50 million spoof emails a year, but NCSE and Interpol discovered that 5 million of them came from one guy. That one guy was in Singapore. He is now in jail. Whereas when there's 500 million spoof emails a year, that's too much for any detective to sift through. It's just beyond human comprehension. So please get involved in the project. Finally, to close out, to remind you, if you send an email now to eauth@globalcyberalliance.org, you can determine whether you are in this extremely vulnerable position we've just talked about. If you are, then yeah, please work with us, please work with ARMC, and we can help you to move forward. So thank you.
Well, Andy, thank you. As per usual, whenever you talk, you kind of like make me feel a little bit more secure that someone's got my back, or at least my, how I kind of keep my email and my, what in fact, do. We are now doing questions and answers. I see there's only, I can see a couple of questions here, but Saldis, do you have any others that you want to share with us? Hello?
Hi there, Ruth. We have got a few questions coming through on the chat, as you can see. From the registration phase, we had a couple of questions that were posed for the panel. I think the first one that we'll go for goes to Dr. Odondu. Dr. Odondu, the question that was posed is, do you believe that the boards and executive committees of banks in Kenya and across the sub-Saharan region are investing enough in understanding and managing the cybersecurity risks faced by the industry? And then there's an adjunct to that: what could be done to improve the current situation, if necessary? So Dr. Odondu, please.
Thank you. I agree with him that I've seen most boards have not really put enough money into cybersecurity, because a number of institutions have been looking at, they just focus on what the CFO, the COI, the Chief Information Officer, has said. And most of them, board members, have very little knowledge of ICT, basically. So we tend to rely on Chief Information Officer, and what he says looks like the final, because we don't have enough information, or we are not that really skilled on that area. And it's one area that I would really want to see the board spending more money in terms of educating board members on, because when it comes to software and such things, we have very little knowledge, and we are so reliant on what we are being told. I chair the audit committee, and one thing that I continue asking, are you telling us the truth? Is that the position? Is that what's supposed to be? And this becomes a permanent question, asking about the cyber attacks. Yes, you can tell us how many cyber attacks have been there, but one cyber attack can really run down the entire institution. It's not the number of cyber attacks that we have. It can be one, but it runs down the whole institution. So half the time I hear the systems are down, you ask yourself what was down. One time a bank had serious system problem. All they'll tell people, the system is down and we are going to come back soon. And it was really a problem of the software and cyber attacks, and they were trying to sort it out. So I agree with him. It's with some area that we need to put more money in terms of getting board members more informed and more skilled in this area. And what we can do is true. We can, we've agreed, is something that the institution, especially financial sector, if you look at how much the financial sector is losing in this area, and you find it's not raised much. We can talk about other losses here, that money has been lost, or theft within the organization, but the loss in cybersecurity, the amount is very high and it's rarely reported. And I think this is something which should be made as a report. And I think even you find you report about the directors, but when it comes to cybersecurity, we would like it to be an institute, an item within an audit report, which must always be reported, that we are having a satisfaction, we are having a high level of confidence is high. The auditor is satisfied, because even the auditors themselves, the way I've seen them, they're also not very skilled in this area. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Odondu, for a comprehensive answer and suggestions on how we can, as an industry, the African sector can, financial services industry can move things forwards. I've got a question in the chat. This question, I believe, is best directed to Andy Bates. It talks about, asks the question around DMARC. It says, how does the DMARC protocol work? if an organization is already using Office 365 and has implemented email security on Office 365, does it mean that without DMARC, we are still vulnerable? Andy Bay?
Yep. No, great question. I actually just put a quick answer in the chat. But yeah, Office 365 is great. The way DMARC works is it works with DNS. DNS is the phone book of the internet. So if I type in bbc.co.uk, DNS takes me to an IP address. So although Office 365 is DMARC enabled, you have to go to your DNS to turn that on. There's more details on our website, or contact me, or we have an upcoming DMARC bootcamp that we can get people to, and it's a kind of series of 5 3-hour sessions. It's a kind of deep techie advanced session, and we certainly touch on that. There's a peculiarity of Microsoft that we're talking to Microsoft about the way they implement this. But yes, any email cloud provider is very DMARC savvy, and it's much easier to turn DMARC on if you're in the cloud that if you won't run your own email servers. But it's think of DNS as being the key and Office 365 as being the safe, and you clearly need the both to work together.
Thank you very much indeed, Andy, for your answer. Brian, I think one of the questions that we at ARMC often come up against that I'd like to pose to you to sort of get your view on is how senior risk managers and senior regulatory compliance managers convince their executive committees, their CEOs, and their boards about the return on investment when it comes to cybersecurity prevention measures, so cybercrime prevention measures, where they are, for example, in a market where it hasn't happened to them yet, and it's not as prevalent as it is perhaps in other markets. What advice, Brian, would you give to other colleagues in similar positions in banks across Africa, similar positions to yourself in banks across Africa, as to how to make the case for the investment in cybersecurity as a risk management measure?
Yeah, well, I think the it's really about the point I made earlier about whack-a-mole. So, the more other countries stop the criminals from operating or make it harder for the criminals to operate, the more they will look for other areas to go to. So any country or any industry that has not yet been impacted, that has vulnerabilities, as soon as those vulnerabilities are known about, you can bet that the criminals will pile in. So I think it's learning the lessons from other jurisdictions. It's also looking at the potential consequence of some of these. So there are different. I mean, even in the area that I work in, which is mainly the fraud area rather than the cyber defense part. So it's mainly the cyber fraud that I deal with on a day-to-day basis. But if you're talking about cyber, defenses, then the catastrophic scenario is you can't operate your business. You don't have control of your systems, or all of your data is published, and your customers don't trust you anymore. There probably isn't quite that catastrophic scenario for cyber fraud on customers, but it doesn't take long to lose confidence of customers. And a good example in the UK is actually TSB had a fairly sizable fraud issue.
The GCA details to find out about how organizations and banks can help to protect their customers, stay safe online through the tools that are available via the GCA. Other than that, back over to you, Ruth. Thank you very much.
Just as you do sell this before Ruth jumps in, I'm seeing some quite technical questions coming up in chat. So on DMARC, so I'll take the action to ping back all of the answers to those questions, and then I know you'll be able to email back to the attendees. So I don't want to leave any of the questions unanswered from today. So hopefully that's okay as a follow-on.
Fantastic, Andy. Thank you very much indeed for doing that.
Well, I just want to thank all the panelists for